It started with a leak. The kind of mundane problem that doesn't seem like the start of anything unusual. Just a steady drip from the ceiling in apartment 302. Margaret Lanes had lived in the building for nearly 12 years, knew every creak of the floorboards, every mood of the aging radiators. But when she called down to maintenance about the water damage blooming in a blackish halo over her bookshelf, no one could figure out where it was coming from. There was no plumbing directly above her apartment. No borspipi, no overflowing tubi, no heine forecast. The only thing above 302 was 402, and 402 had been empty for years. The landlord said it had been sealed off due to asbestos. Others whispered it had been condemned, something about unstable flooring or lead paint, or maybe it was just the smell. But no one ever saw contractors going in or out. No lights turned on. No one ever heard a sound from a unit. Still, the door was locked from the inside. "You sure it's not just condensation?" The building manager, Dave, asked Margaret as he shone a weak flashlight over her warped ceiling. He looked annoyed, like he had more pressing complaints than phantom water. "Place is old. Air gets trapped. Condensation doesn't bleed through plaster and ruin my copy of Wuthering Heights," Margaret snapped. "And it smells." Dave sniffed the air reluctantly. A sour, earthy stench clung to the walls like mildew, but thicker, almost organic. His face twitched. "Okay, I'll have maintenance check upstairs." But maintenance didn't have the keys. No one did. 402 was sealed from the inside. They told her, with old nails punched into the doorframe and rusted bolts no one had bothered to touch in over a decade. The only way in would be to break it open, and that would require a permit, insurance waivers, and more time than Dave was willing to commit to. So Margaret was left with a bucket under her ceiling, the dripping only getting louder. Then came the knocking. 3 soft raps, always at 3:33 a.m. The first time it happened, Margaret thought it was the radiator, an old building thing. But on the third night, when she tiptoed to her door and peered through the peephole, she saw something strange. The hallway was empty, except for a light under the door of 402. Yellow, flickering like candlelight. She stepped back. Something cold ran down her spine. She lived alone on her floor. Apartment 401 was vacant, and 403 had been gutted for renovations months ago. No one should be lighting candles. No one should be in 402 at all. By morning, the light was gone, and the hallway looked normal again. But the smell lingered, stronger now. Metallic, almost sweet. Margaret began asking the other tenants questions. Quietly, carefully. Most people hadn't even thought about 402 in years. Some didn't know it existed. "Isn't that a storage room now?" an elderly man on the first floor asked. "They boarded it up back in 2011, I think. After that fire." "You remember that fire?" No. Margaret didn't remember a fire. She searched online, but found nothing. No news reports, no inspection records, not even a mention of apartment 402 on the building's online floor plans. It was as if it had been erased. But the knocking continued. Every night, 3:33 a.m., without fail. Sometimes it was louder, angrier, like fists. Sometimes it was scratching, soft, deliberate, just behind her walls. Once, she swore she heard whispering. Faint, indecipherable, and always that same smell. Margaret installed a cheap motion sensor camera facing the hallway outside her apartment. She figured maybe some teens had broken in, maybe someone was squatting in the abandoned unit. The first 2 nights, the camera picked up nothing. But on the third, the motion alert pinged her phone at 3:34 a.m. She opened the app, half asleep, annoyed, until she saw the video feed. A figure stood motionless in front of 402, not facing the camera, not even facing the door, just standing sideways like it was listening, watching the hallway. It didn't move, didn't shift, just stood there like a shadow, unblinking. Even the grainy night vision couldn't explain the lack of detail. No facial features, no defining clothes, just the outline of a man. Thin, tall. Margaret sat upright in bed, heart racing. She scrubbed back through the feed, but there was no footage of the figure entering. It simply appeared in one frame, then vanished in the next. The camera had no blind spots. There was no editing. She checked timestamps, battery life. Everything was working. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she took the footage to the building manager. Dave watched the video, scratched his head, and gave a half-hearted shrug. Could be someone playing a prank, he muttered. I'll check the locks. You don't get it, Margaret said, her voice cracking. They're not trying to get in. They're trying to get out. That night, the knocking didn't come at 3:33. It came at 3 o'clock, then again at 3:10, then again, and again, all night long. The banging was louder, more frantic. Her walls trembled. Books fell off shelves. The ceiling cracked, the leak turning into a slow but steady stream of dark water. When she turned on the lights, it shimmered faintly red. Margaret fled to her sister's place the next day, but she couldn't stay away. Something kept gnawing at her. A compulsion, a pull like 402 wasn't done with her. She had dreams now, of a door with no handle, of whispers behind wallpaper, of a voice saying, "Let me explain." She returned to the apartment 2 days later. It was quiet, too quiet, but her door was open. The motion camera, unplugged. She stepped inside and stopped cold. Her entire apartment smelled like earth, like grave dirt. A thick, musty fog seemed to hang in the air. On the floor at her living room, perfectly centered, was a key. Old, brass, hand-carved with the number 402. Margaret didn't remember picking up the key. One moment she was staring at it, her breath catching in her throat, and the next, it was in her hand. Heavy, cold. It pulsed faintly, like it had a heartbeat. She stood in her apartment, unsure how long she'd been there, her thoughts blurring into static. The key had weight in more than just mass. It felt loaded with meaning, like it had waited years to be touched again. She should have thrown it away, burned it, called someone, anyone, to tell them what she'd found. Instead, she walked slowly up the stairwell to the 4th floor. Apartment 402 sat at the far end of the hallway, past a flickering light bulb that buzzed like a trapped fly. The hallway had always been dim, but today it felt darker. The wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips, revealing stained plaster beneath, and the air smelled like old wood and rot. She approached the door. It looked like something out of time, ancient, wrong in a way she couldn't quite name. The nails that had sealed it shut were gone, though no one had been seen removing them. The wood was weathered, its paint blistered, and yet the keyhole gleamed. Margaret raised the key. Her hand trembled, but something deeper, stronger, guided her, as if whatever was on the other side had been waiting, longing, not to escape, but to be seen, to be understood. The key slid in with unnatural ease. One smooth turn. Click. She hesitated. The silence in the hallway was absolute. Even the building's familiar creaks had vanished. The air was still, too still. Then, slowly, she pushed the door open. It groaned on its hinges. Beyond the threshold, thick shadows waited. Not total darkness, but not light either. A dusk that seemed to exist nowhere else in the building. Dust motes hung suspended in the air, unnaturally still. The apartment smelled of time, old paper, rust, and something almost floral. She stepped inside. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the door behind her slammed shut. Margaret spun, heart pounding. She tried the knob, locked. The key was no longer in her hand. The room was silent. She turned around slowly. Apartment 402 looked lived in. Not ruined, not abandoned. There were books on shelves, a cracked porcelain teapot on a side table, photographs in dusty frames, though the faces inside were smeared, as if the glass had melted them. A piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and warped. The furniture was from another era, maybe the 1940s, all heavy wood and claw footlegs. She walked deeper into the apartment, drawn forward by something she couldn't name. Her footsteps were muffled, like the air itself was thick. Then she heard it, a voice, whispering, faint, just behind a wall. Then again, clearer. Please help me. Margaret froze. The voice was young, female, trembling, and close. Where are you? She called out, her own voice sounding muted, swallowed by the apartment. Silence. She followed the sound, weaving through narrow hallways that didn't match the building's architecture. The layout was wrong. Doors led to rooms that curved in impossible ways, staircases that descended a few steps and vanished. Mirrors lined the walls, all reflecting her, but only her. The apartment was windowless. Tom didn't seem to move here. Then she reached a room that felt colder than the rest. The nursery. It was perfectly preserved. Pale blue walls, a wooden rocking chair, a crib, and in the crib, a baby monitor, ancient-looking, with a small red light flickering. She didn't remember walking toward it. Her hand reached down, picked it up. Static. Then a voice. The same girl's voice. Louder now. They locked me in, but I wasn't alone. The red light blinked. Who are you? Margaret whispered. The baby monitor buzzed. Her name was Elsie, the voice said, and she never left. The air turned bitter cold. Margaret's breath misted. The shadows in the room seemed to shift. She turned toward the mirror above the changing table and saw something behind her, a girl. Pale, eyes hollowed, wearing a 1950s-style nightgown. Reaching, Margaret spun. The room was empty. She backed out slowly, heart hammering. I'm not supposed to be here, she said aloud. This place isn't real. But her voice sounded strange, like it echoed somewhere else. Somewhere far away. Then the lights flickered, and something started moving behind the walls. A slow, dragging sound, like heavy cloth being pulled across wood. Then scratching, then breathing. She ran, down corridors that changed shape behind her, past photographs with the faces burned out, through doors that opened into stairwells leading nowhere. The apartment was a maze, alive, watching. Finally, she reached the entrance again, or what used to be the entrance. The door was gone. In its place was a mirror, floor to ceiling, smooth, flawless glass. She stared at it, shaking. Her reflection stared back. But it wasn't right. It smiled. She didn't. It raised its hand before she did. Margaret stumbled back. No, she whispered. The reflection tilted its head. Its eyes darkened. Its lips moved. No sound came out, but she could read the words. Let me in. Then the mirror cracked. Not shattered, just a single, jagged line across the surface. The walls began to close in. She screamed, pounding the glass. Let me out. This isn't real. The crack widened. A dark liquid seeped from it, thick, tar-like. It ran down the surface of the mirror, pooling at her feet. Behind her, footsteps. Barefoot. Slow. She didn't look. She couldn't. A whisper in her ear. Hot breath. Switch with me. Margaret didn't remember passing out. She awoke to silence. Not the comforting kind, but a heavy, suffocating absence of sound. The kind of silence that made her ears ring. She was on the floor in front of the mirror, where the dark tar-like substance had pooled. But it was gone now. So was the crack in the mirror. In fact, the mirror was no longer just a mirror. It was a window. Through it, she could see herself. Not her reflection, but a duplicate. Another Margaret, standing in her apartment hallway. Outside the door to 402, as if time had reversed itself. The other Margaret blinked, then raised her hand and knocked on the door. Margaret leapt up and screamed, Don't open it. But no sound came from her throat. Her duplicate turned the knob, opened the door, and stepped inside. The mirror went black. Margaret stumbled back, her breathing ragged. Her hand was shaking violently now. This wasn't a haunting, it was a trap, a cycle, one that didn't begin with her and wouldn't end with her unless she broke it. She turned from the mirror, intent on finding any way out, a window, a loose panel, something. But the apartment didn't allow such logic. Doors that led to kitchens now opened into closets. Stairs spiraled upward, then vanished into ceilings. Time bent, and so did space. She wandered for what felt like hours, maybe more. Time was no longer a measurement that mattered here. At some point, the lights began to dim to a strange sepia hue, and everything around her took on the look of an old film reel. Shadows danced in the corners of her vision, always moving just out of reach. Then she heard the lullaby, soft, off-key, hummed by a child. It came from the end of a long hallway lined with doors. The kind of hallway that felt too long for the space it should fit into. Each step Margaret took felt harder, like the air was thickening, pulling her down. At the end of the hall was a door unlike the others, not wooden but iron. Rusted, ancient, with strange etchings carved into its surface. Her hand trembled as she reached for the handle. It turned easily. Inside was a room untouched by time. The girl sat on the floor, back turned, humming to herself. Her hair was long and dark and tangled down her back. Dolls were scattered in a ring around her, each one missing eyes. The air buzzed with static energy. "Hello," Margaret whispered. The girl stopped humming. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes were sewn shut, but somehow, Margaret knew she could see her. "You opened the door," the girl said. Her voice was calm, like she was commenting on the weather. "They always open the door." Margaret swallowed. "Who are you?" "I'm Elsie," the girl said. "I was the first." "The first what?" "The first to answer the knock." The room darkened slightly, as if the air dimmed. Elsie stood, the dolls clattering around her. Her skin was pale, veined with gray lines that pulsed faintly. And yet, she looked innocent, like she had once been a normal child. "They say this place was built on the wrong kind of ground," Elsie continued, her head tilting slightly. "Not cursed, not haunted, just wrong. A crack in the world, like a scab that never heals." She walked to the edge of the room, her bare feet silent. "It feeds off patterns, repetition, curiosity." Her voice grew quieter. "People like you." "I didn't mean to," Margaret began. "But you did. You saw the key. You touched it. You opened the door. The same way they all do." She gestured to the wall behind her. It shimmered, then revealed dozens of faces, trapped behind glass. Men, women, children, their eyes wide with terror, all mid-scream, frozen in some eternal snapshot of panic. "No," Margaret whispered, backing away. Elsie watched her with that unnerving sewn gaze. "They made me a part of it. I don't even remember my real name anymore. Just what they gave me. The apartment won't let you leave unless it wants to. But there has to be a way out." "There is," Elsie said, "but it always costs." Margaret stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Someone has to take your place." The realization hit Margaret like ice water. The mirror, the reflection, the other her. It hadn't been showing her a past self. It had been preparing a replacement. Someone to take the vacancy. She turned sharply. "I have to stop her." "You can try," Elsie said, sitting back down and lifting a broken doll to her lap. "But remember, the longer you stay here, the less you remember. Soon you'll forget what the sky looks like, what your own voice sounds like." Margaret ran. The apartment warped around her again, reshaping into impossible geometries. Hallways twisted. Furniture melted into walls. Doors appeared and vanished. The mirrors she passed no longer reflected her at all. They showed versions of her, crying, screaming, laughing manically. She burst into the main hallway. The mirror was back, but it wasn't black this time. It showed her apartment hallway again, and the new Margaret was inside, sitting on the floor, crying. Something had already begun. She banged on the glass. "Stop! Don't believe it! Get out!" But her voice was muffled, muted, a soundless scream. Then, a doppelganger looked up and smiled. "No tears, no confusión." Just a slow, knowing smile. Margaret's blood turned to ice. It wasn't her at all. It was the apartment wearing her face. A perfect replica, and it had already taken her place. She stumbled back, chest heaving. Then the lights cut out completely. Total darkness. Not even a pinprick of light remained. Only the sound of breathing close, right next to her ear. Then a whisper. "You're home now." Darkness wasn't just the absence of light anymore. It had substance. A presence. It wrapped itself around Margaret like a wet cloth, thick and suffocating. She couldn't see her own hands, couldn't hear her own footsteps. Even her thoughts felt muffled, as if the apartment itself had begun seeping into her mind. She whispered her own name just to hear something. Nothing came out. Her sense of time had disintegrated completely. She wasn't sure if minutes or hours had passed when a faint blue glow appeared in the distance, a light so soft it barely touched the edges of the shadows. It flickered like candlelight through fog. Drawn to it, Margaret moved forward, hands brushing against damp walls that pulsed beneath her fingertips like they were breathing. The blue glow led her into a room she hadn't seen before. A library. Dust floated in the air like snow. Books lined every wall, but none of them had titles. Only blank spines and brittle covers. A single candle burned on a desk in the center, illuminating a journal. It looked familiar. She stepped forward, heart hammering. It was her handwriting. Margaret opened the journal. Pages had been filled. Names, dates, thoughts she had never written. The entries detailed her arrival, her descent into confusion, her encounter with Elsie. Then, day 37. I'm beginning to forget my last name. Day 44. The mirror won't show me anymore. Just her. Day 52. I remember I used to love someone. A brother? Or maybe a cat. It doesn't matter. The apartment feeds on memory. I'm becoming a whisper. She slammed the journal shut, trembling. That wasn't possible. She had only just arrived. The candle blew out. The room vanished into blackness. And then a voice, soft, steady, deep, like a lullaby spoken in reverse. She has read the book. Margaret turned wildly. Eyes opened in the dark. Dozens of them. Pale, lidless, staring from impossible angles, from shelves, from the ceiling, from the floor beneath her feet. She bolted. The apartment no longer pretended to obey physics. Doors opened to stairwells that dropped off into infinite space. Rooms flipped, twisting upside down, forcing her to crawl on ceilings and leap through door frames that moved like gaping mouths. Her breath became steam. Her skin burned cold. And all the while whispers. You opened it. You are the offering. You belong here now. She stumbled through a door and slammed it behind her, only to realize she was back in apartment 402. But something had changed. The furniture was arranged differently. The lights flickered a pale green. And there, standing in the kitchen, was her reflection. No, not her reflection. The doppelganger. The false Margaret. She smiled sweetly. You're still here. Margaret backed away. You're not me. No, the other said, tilting her head. But I wear you better than you wore yourself. You're the apartment. I'm what the apartment needs. The false Margaret walked closer, barefoot. A willing occupant. Someone who answers the knock, opens the door, and chooses to stay. Margaret's fists clenched. I never chose this. You did. Her double stopped inches away. When you touched the key, when you turned the knob, when you stepped inside, knowing something wasn't right. Her voice dropped, softer now. You weren't running toward anything, Margaret. You were running from something. You wanted to disappear. And the apartment listens. Margaret froze. She had been running. Her job, her failed relationship, the gnawing sense of purposelessness that had followed her for years. She'd taken the sublet from a stranger because she wanted to start over, to vanish into anonymity. You didn't come here by accident, the doppelganger said. You were chosen, because you fit the shape. Margaret stepped back, tried to clear her head. There's still a way out. Elsie said, Elsie is part of the story, just like I am, just like you're becoming. Her mirror twin tilted her head, blinking slowly. But if you really want to leave, there's only one way. Margaret's voice shook. Which is? You pass it on. The next room was filled with mirrors. Hundreds of them, floor to ceiling, all showing different versions of Margaret. Some old, some young, some bloodied, some laughing. One was holding a child. Another was locked in a padded cell. All trapped. She spun in circles, trying to make sense of it. The doppelganger's voice echoed around her, no longer tied to a body. Choose the one to stay. The apartment only requires a soul. It doesn't care which one. One of the mirrors began to glow. Inside it, Margaret saw someone else. Not her. A young woman. Blonde. Carrying boxes into the hallway. Her phone lit up with a text. "Your new place looks amazing. Can't believe how cheap it was." Margaret stared. This girl, she was about to move in. "To leave, you must trade," the voice whispered. "Take her place, and she will take yours." Margaret pressed her hand to the glass. She could feel the choice. But then she hesitated. Would she do to this stranger what the apartment had done to her? Could she? And then, her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Faint. A memory from years ago. Doing the right thing isn't about what's fair. It's about what you can live with. Margaret let her hand fall away from the mirror. "No," she whispered. The mirrors began to shudder violently. All around her, the reflection screamed. The walls cracked. The apartment groaned in rage. And the doppelganger returned, now distorted, her face melting, bones twisting. "You refuse the offer?" Margaret stood firm. "I won't trap someone else here. Not to save myself." The false Margaret snarled. "Then you become the apartment." The mirrors shattered. Darkness swallowed everything. And Margaret fell. Not down, but inward. Into herself. Through layers of memory, of feeling, of self. Into the center of the thing. She awoke in the hallway. The real hallway. Morning sunlight trickled in through the dusty windows. Apartment 402 stood in front of her. The door was open. Inside, nothing. No furniture. No meters. No sound. Just bare floors and faded wallpaper. Margaret stepped inside slowly, heart racing. Everything was quiet, but it felt different. Hollow. She walked to the living room window and pulled aside the curtain. Outside, the city was alive. Cars. People. The real world. She was back. She was free. Or so she thought. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small box on the floor, placed neatly at the center of the room. Inside it, a mirror, and a key, and a note. "Welcome home." Margaret didn't take the key. She didn't touch the mirror. She left them in the box, slammed the door of apartment 402 behind her, and walked out of the building with the kind of quiet urgency that only comes from surviving something you don't fully understand. The street outside was brighter than she remembered. Too bright. The people walking past didn't glance her way. Not even the doorman who had once nodded at her every morning. It was as if she'd become invisible. Still, she moved forward. Days passed. She got a hotel. She contacted her family, though the conversations were hollow. They remembered her, yes, but something was off in their voices, like they were reading from a script they hadn't rehearsed in years. Her mother even asked if she still lived in Chicago. Margaret had never lived in Chicago. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw reflections. Not hers, but fractured versions of herself in the mirror room. They whispered warnings. Or maybe they were memories. She couldn't tell anymore. Her phone rang constantly now. Unknown numbers. Voicemails that were nothing but static. One night, she answered. A voice crackled through the line. It wasn't supposed to be you. She hung up, turned off her phone, but she couldn't turn off her mind. The apartment wasn't just a haunted space. It was a mechanism, a device that needed a soul to operate. The moment she refused the exchange, she changed something fundamental, and now the machine was out of balance. She tried to ignore it, try to live a normal day. She went for a walk, ate at a cafe, smiled at a child who dropped their ice cream cone. But as she passed a shop window, she saw it. Not her reflection. The doppelganger. Still watching. Still smiling. Margaret stumbled back, heart racing. And then the lights in the cafe flickered. People inside froze mid-bite. The barista stopped pouring coffee midstream. Everything paused. Margaret blinked. The world resumed. But she knew. She hadn't escaped. She'd only postponed what was coming. That night, the box was in her hotel room. No one had entered. No signs of forced entry. It was simply there, sitting on the bed, just like before. Mirror. Key. Note. There is no outside. Only before and after. Margaret grabbed it, marched outside, and threw in a dumpster. She didn't hear it hit the bottom. Back at her room, she turned on every light, turned the TV volume up, tried to distract herself. But at exactly 3:03 a.m., the lights dimmed. The TV turned to static, and the mirror appeared on her nightstand. This time, it reflected something new. Apartment 402. Empty. Waiting. She screamed. The mirror cracked. Not physically, but inside. The image warped like water and pulled her in. Suddenly, she was standing inside the apartment again. Only this time, it wasn't a memory. The dust was real. The floor beneath her feet creaked. The air smelled like damp stone and candle wax. She was back. A whisper from the hallway chilled her to the core. "Margaret," she spun. It wasn't the doppelganger. It was Elsie. Pale. Wide-eyed. Her hair now streaked with gray. "I tried to fight it," Elsie said, voice trembling. "But the apartment doesn't forget. You can leave, but part of you stays. Always." Margaret backed up toward the door. "I didn't come back willingly." Elsie reached out, hand shaking. "Then you need to listen." They sat in the candlelit kitchen, though the air was unnaturally cold. The windows showed nothing but swirling fog outside. "There was never just one apartment," Elsie whispered. "Apartment 402 is an anchor, a root node, but there are others. Dozens. Hundreds. All linked through memory and sacrifice." "Why me?" Margaret asked. "Why now?" Elsie looked away. "Because you resisted." "That's good, isn't it?" "No," she said. "It's what woke it up." Margaret's throat tightened. "Woke what up?" "The original occupant," Elsie said. "Before even I got trapped. A woman who built the door and locked it from the inside. She thought she could contain it, but she failed. Now it's awake, and it wants a new architect." Margaret stood, shaking her head. "No, no, I'm not building anything. I'm not part of this." "You already are." Elsie stood too. "The moment you walked through that door." Thunder rumbled in the distance, not outside but beneath the floor. The walls of the apartment began to ripple like liquid. The hallway door burst open, and there she was, the original woman, dressed in 1800s morning clothes, with a face so blurred and obscured it seemed to warp light. Her hand was stained with ink, her mouth stitched shut with crimson thread, and behind her floated dozens of others, past occupants, all spectral, all broken. Elsie whispered, "She's chosen you to finish what she couldn't." The woman raised one hand. The mirror on the kitchen wall cracked. Light poured through the fractures, and Margaret began to remember. Blueprints, symbols, rituals passed down through dreams. The entire apartment, its structure, its angles, the way it bent reality, had been engineered. This wasn't a haunting. This was a machine built to store consciousness. But something had gone wrong. Now, it wasn't just storing souls. It was feeding on them, and it needed repairs. Margaret was the patch. The next few days, if they could be called that, passed in a haze of surreal instructions and impossible architecture. She was forced to rebuild rooms with her thoughts, design new thresholds with memory. Each door she shaped required a piece of her past, a childhood friend, a beloved pet, her favorite song. Every choice cost her something. She could feel herself becoming less herself. Elsie guided her, but Margaret could see it in the older woman's eyes. She was barely holding on. "I tried to finish it too," Elsie whispered once, "but I ran out of things I could give." Margaret looked down at her hands. They were flickering, not visibly, but she felt it. Her fingers existed only when she focused on them. She was becoming memory. She had to escape. One night, the final door appeared. It led into the hallway, the real hallway, the one outside the apartment. Elsie touched her arm. "You can leave now. You finish your part. But what about you?" Elsie smiled sadly. "I gave too much already. I'm part of the framework now. Just do one thing." Margaret nodded. "Anything. Don't let it grow. Don't let anyone else walk through the door." Margaret stepped out. The hallway was empty. The air was real. The floor beneath her didn't pulse. She turned to look back. Apartment 402's door was closed and nailed shut. A note was taped to it. "Do not open. For any reason. She added her own. If you see your reflection move first, run. Margaret didn't go home. She couldn't. Not after what she'd seen. Not after what she'd become. She moved into a small rental outside the city. A quiet place with no mirrors, no heavy doors, no architectural anomalies. She didn't unpack much, just enough to exist. Her laptop stayed off. Her phone buried in a drawer. The world outside buzzed on, oblivious. But something in her had shifted. She no longer dreamed like a normal person. Her sleep was filled with blueprints, strange corridors, rooms that weren't hers. She'd wake up whispering symbols she didn't understand. Sometimes she'd open her eyes and see doors where walls should be. They'd flicker, then vanish. And worst of all, she could hear it. The apartment, calling her. Not physically, no address, no postal code, just presence. She kept the memory of Elsie alive in her thoughts. It grounded her, until one morning, 3 weeks later, she received a letter. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. A man she didn't know, standing in the hallway of an apartment building. The number above the door? 402. Below the image, a message was scribbled in block letters. He went in and never came out. They've started building again. Margaret stared at it for a long time, then flipped the photo over. More handwriting. The blueprints are incomplete. You're the only one who can stop it from spreading. She sat in silence and felt the weight return. She had left, but not entirely. She was still part of it. That night, she dreamt of a different building, one she'd never seen before. Same angles, same corridors, different number on the door. 604. Margaret wasn't a hero. She didn't set out to save the world, but something inside her, maybe what was left untouched by the apartment, refused to let others fall the way she almost had. She started researching again. Apartment buildings with mysterious disappearances. Renters who went off the grid. Patterns and floor plans that didn't make sense. And the more she looked, the more she found. Buildings in Toronto, Berlin, Seoul, Cape Town. All with similar rumors. One specific unit locked from the inside. No visitors. Strange sounds at night. And always the number ending in 04 or 02. She realized the truth then. It wasn't a building. It was a design. Replicated. Evolving. And each one needed a builder. Someone to complete the structure, to finish the ritual that bound reality and memory inside the walls. She wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. Unless Margaret created a false identity, one that wouldn't trace back to her. She called herself Elena Graft and posed as a structural consultant, offering free inspections to landlords and superintendents of buildings with urban legend problems. Most ignored her. Some accepted. A few revealed the truth. She visited 9 buildings in 2 months. 5 were just rumors. 2 had sealed-off wings with doors that made her stomach twist. 1 had blueprints taped to the inside of a closet, hand-drawn, and identical to the one she saw in her dreams. But one had already been activated. Apartment 904. In Detroit. The building was low-income, almost condemned. The air reeked of mold and old cigarette smoke. No concierge, no cameras. Just flickering fluorescent lights and hallways lined with peeling paint. Margaret didn't need to ask where 904 was. She felt it. The hallway leading to the unit was colder. The lights didn't flicker. They stayed off completely. And outside the door, salt scattered in a circle, old newspapers taped across the wood, handwritten warnings scrawled in red ink. Do not knock. Do not speak. But she didn't either. She listened, and she heard crying. From the inside, a child. Margaret's body went rigid. She stepped back, but the door, already unlocked, creaked open on its own. The crying stopped. Then, footsteps. Small, barefoot. Something was coming to the door. She turned to run, but her legs didn't respond. The hallway behind her warped, stretching endlessly, swallowing the exit. She was inside before she realized it. The apartment looked nothing like the others. This one was unfinished. Exposed wires. Walls without paint. doors that led to nowhere. But in the center of the room was a child. A girl, no older than 7, dressed in a gray nightgown. Margaret stared at her, and the girl stared back. But her eyes, they were black holes. Not metaphorically, literally. Empty sockets that pulsed like wormholes swallowing light. "You're early," the girl said, voice flat. Margaret swallowed. "What are you? On what's left when the door doesn't close right?" the girl replied. "I don't want to build anymore," Margaret whispered. "But you will. You have to, or it leaks out." The apartment groaned. From the walls, faces began to push through, trapped people. Not souls, not ghosts, failures. The girl pointed to the mirror across the room. "Pick up the key." "No, you have to." "Why?" "Because they're waiting." Her voice cracked. "And if you don't finish it, they'll spill into the rest of the world." Margaret turned to the mirror. There were 1,000 versions of her inside, each trapped in their own copy of apartment 402. All screaming, all building, over and over again. This wasn't about one building anymore. It was about containment, about keeping it from growing. And she realized if she didn't continue the construction, even for just a little while longer, it wouldn't stop at one apartment or one city or even one dimension. It would leak into every space that had ever forgotten its own boundaries. Margaret took the key, and she built again, not to trap others, but to slow it down. Each piece of memory she surrendered slowed the growth. Every room she completed sealed off another version of reality from spilling into this one. She became a whisper in the system, a failsafe, a guardian. Years passed. Her name disappeared from records. People forgot her, but she was still there, between the walls, beneath the floorboards, watching, maintaining, waiting for the day someone else might walk through a door that should have never been opened. And when they do, they'll see it, a note nailed to the door. The door was locked from the inside for a reason, and in small handwriting beneath it. "But if it opens, don't look in the mirror,"